funny derby. But good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is really sad that this is our last Torah study together. I've really enjoyed each of the times we've been together. Maybe during the High Holy Days, we can do another Torah study or adult education. Just a couple times while I'm here for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Fingers crossed on my end, at least, that we'll do that. But today, I hope everybody's on the edge of their seats. We've got an exciting story from the Talmud. I remember last time I was here, we were talking about how we hadn't studied Talmud very much and that there was kind of a yearning to get a sense for it. So this time, the Talmud has two parts. There's Halachic Talmud, which teaches the laws and specifics of Jewish tradition and practice. And then there is Aggadic Talmud, which has stories, parables, and different situations to express Jewish values, whether those are the halakhic values being at play or just Jewish values in general. So today we have the Oven of Akhnai. I don't know if that's a story familiar with anyone, but it's, if I were to vote on a story, it's top 3 Talmud stories of all time. And I wanted to start with an intuition pump that is pretty common in philosophical circles because it's a common thing in Greek philosophy. And it's this philosophy idea that says, if a ship, and the name of the ship is the ship of Theseus, and this is at the very top of our source sheet. If a ship has all its parts replaced, is it still the same ship? One at a time, one board is replaced, then another, slowly, one at a time. Is it still the same ship? And if the old parts are reassembled elsewhere, which is the real ship? This is a question about identity. And our story harps on this idea in a very boldened way. Does anybody have an intuition of where? Yeah.
It reminds me of a river flowing into a lake. Standing and watching the river and the water goes by, still the same river. The lake which received that water is not the river.
At which point does the river become the lake too? At what period in the flow?
That, being the physician, I thought you would say, every few years, every cell in your body is a new cell. Are you, right?
Same kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the file that came out from the excrement,
Yeah.
that certainly is not me.
Right.
Thanks for sharing. Hip replacement, all the body part replacement.
Yeah, and are we the same people that we were? Is our identity continuous from when we were an infant? Or have we changed so much that our identity is completely different?
Feels to me a lot like when you think about light, it's a wave and also particles, it's both. And it's hard to like hold both, that's how I think of it.
That's interesting. We're getting into the physics side of things of how light waves.
Both things,
Yeah.
right? We're different and we are also some.
Exactly. There's continuity, but there's also breaks and changes within continuity. Does continuity allow for those changes? Or do we lose something every time we have a change in continuity?
Well, if the river flows into the lake and then flows out the other side, is it still the same river? It's a different river?
Well, but you're talking about the actual water. A river is not defined by the particles of water that is inside of it. It's defined by its geology and where it is.
That's also a good point of who decides what is river and what is lake. Where is the naming coming in?
Well,
We just saw.
Same as the Gulf of Mexico.
That's a great addition, right? Like, who gets to decide the name? Is it Donald Trump or is it history for continuity?
Unfortunately, it's a form.
Saw a lake and a river, I think. And they didn't cross paths. They met at a junction. And they stayed on their side of the turf war.
What was
They
it?
didn't,
It was a delta in the ocean was coming.
Oh, so they both say
Salt water and
individual as
fresh
they
water.
met.
they met, they didn't breach, they just. Came together, but didn't do anything.
Hmm.
They didn't proceed. It was like an invisible barrier.
So that seems like it's pretty clear. The rivers preserved their identity and continuity throughout because of the pressures of the water, that there wasn't a mingling to create the question that we have right in front of us. Correct.
No, there was some.
The statement you
we-
made about humans and gain, what would gain, what do you lose and what do you gain? I mean,
Mhm.
there's two halves of that. So I think you phrased, I can't remember now, because
When
we've gone
we-
into rivers.
When there's change in continuity, is there always something lost?
Lost, but there's something gained. So.
Mhm.
yeah, maybe.
And I think that's a good point, and whether it's naming or whether it's our identity, it's different on the situation as well of how much is gained and how much is lost. I don't know how much is gained by the Gulf of Mexico renaming, but it also brings up the question, is it really the Gulf of Mexico? Or is it the Gulf of America if the majority of the world still understands it as the Gulf of Mexico? Just because one person decides the name of something, does that have the authority to change the identity, or does the majority decide it?
You have to ask the guys in the AP who got kicked out of the press room.
Well, that's true.
But you change and you gain, you said lost, but if you learned a new language or went into a new profession or made another change, became a parent, all the things that make
Mhm.
adults different from, as they grow, those are gain,
I
not
think
loss.
that's a really great point to bring in, that
Well-
in this strand of identity, there's still an arc towards great, even if we're losing parts of our identity as we make those changes.
I think we all change all the time and we're growing and changing all the time, and it's just like. When you said who has the right, the singular majority, what if someone decides they want to change their sex or their morale or their name or whatever?
Oh.
What if they want to do it? Who cares what the majority says or not, so
That's true, and so that has to do with who's the authority over the individual, who's the authority over the communal, and I think it's a different conversation. If we're talking about just myself or your identity is very different than the identity of the temple. And so that's something I want to keep in mind, that we have this idea of identity when change is happening, when parts are replaced one by one, change happens, yes, loss happens, but gain can also occur. It leaves potential for great gain at the same time.
Can I just throw out one image that
Yeah,
we have a granddaughter who was shadowing a orthopedic surgeon as part of her training, and she saw a surgery where they were replacing someone's knee, and she said, "Oh, this was just great. They just sawed above and below. They took out the joint, threw it in a bin, and plopped in the artificial one." And I said, I have an artificial knee. My knee's been replaced. The image of taking out my original equipment and just throwing it in a bin. I don't know, it bothered me, and it
Yeah.
was sort of, are you different if you have artificial joints or other parts that have been put in?
and I think that's a good question. That's exactly what this ship question here is. If you remove boards of a ship one at a time, if it's just a few boards, it's not a question. It's still the same ship. It's got the same steering wheel. I don't know ship parts. It's got the thing that holds the sail and steers the ship. But once you move the thing that steers the ship, it starts to be much more in question. Ken, and last word, and then we'll hop
Just
into
super
the
quick,
text.
so about the thesis story, I remember from college when I studied psychology, there were some psychologists try to operationalize this. Decide, and what they did was they had a picture of a bowl and a cup. And they systematically removed different aspects of the bowl. It was the cup, the bowl, and until people started saying it was a bowl as opposed to a cup. And what you're able to do with this is you're able to statistically kind of uncover what the majority of people felt as to one thing versus the other. It's very
so
hard to do
interesting.
in a larger with a human being, but they tried to do it.
At a
as bowl and
small
cup.
level.
Yeah, so I thought it was right, and you're able to quantify that because you're just changing little aspects of the.
Yeah, it's
That way
interesting.
someone, if you were looking at heart replacement, right, you got a heart transplant, I don't think it's a new person, but if somebody had a brain transplant, my guess is you'd start thinking they might not.
I think that goes to
I
what,
think this is a great question.
what if someone
And-
started putting someone else's body or someone else's?
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna hop into the text very quickly because these conversations will all come up. I don't wanna keep the Jewish tradition out of this because this is very much at the forefront of the discussion in the Talmud. And so can we start over here, Katie?
With identity?
No, actually with Bava Metzia 59.
Oh, okay. Apropos the topic of verbal mistreatment, we learned in the Mishnah there, if one cut an earthenware oven with what? I can't speak
With
today.
what? Horizontally.
Into segments and place sand between each and every segment. Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. Because of the sand, its legal status is not that of a complete vessel, and therefore it is not susceptible to ritual impurity. And the rabbis deem it ritually impure as it is functionally a complete oven.
Okay, so let me just explain this because the English is tough.
Yeah.
If an oven is sliced horizontally, and so it's broken into pieces, and then it is placed back together into the shape of an oven using sand or a concrete-esque thing to keep the pieces together to make it function like an oven, is it still an oven? Is it still the same oven? It's the same question as the ship of Theseus, essentially, but now we have two different sides of the debate. Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure, which this is actually a stance saying it is no longer an oven or the same oven. Because if it is the same oven, it is liable to the laws of impurity and purity. And so an oven that was rendered impure, still broken into pieces and comes back, he's saying it is not liable to the law of that impurity prior to the breaking. The rabbis are saying it is the same oven and therefore it is vulnerable to the laws of purity and impurity.
Yeah, so like the Torah portion we're in right now is about how ritual impurity going into the temple in Jerusalem, if you're ritually impure, it's contagious, right? And so that's what we're talking about. You don't need to get so bogged down in ritually impure versus not impure. The most important thing is one rabbi thinks one thing and the majority think another thing.
I mean,
What a
it doesn't
shock.
matter what, what you're adding to it. What you're adding to it, if that's an acceptable thing to add to, like you said, it says the sand is an okay thing to add to it, whereas if you use, I don't know, pork rinds or something, put it back together, then what you're adding to it is something impure, so
Yeah.
that is part of the thing.
So specifically, this is a neutral filler type material to say, if you put this back together, is it still the same oven that it was before? That was susceptible to the laws of pure or impure, or is it a different oven? Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's a different oven. It is not susceptible to the purity laws that it dealt with before, and the other rabbis are saying it is. So the ship of Theseus, this very similar conversation here.
I don't understand. They modified the oven. Maybe they made it better. It's still an oven.
But it's not, they're not arguing about the efficiency of the oven. They're not arguing, can it make better pizzas? They're arguing about specific,
Is it an oven?
Is
Yeah.
it the same
So-
Same
oven
oven,
or
that's
is it a
correct.
different oven? It's
Yeah.
not about functionality.
Yeah.
It says, is it the same oven that it was before once it was sliced horizontally and put back together, or is it a different oven?
Very easy to answer that. Whoever has the power of definition creates what it is.
That's exactly the question. Your foresight is wonderful.
Mark this day.
Forethought, yeah. So the question really here is, who gets to decide if the oven is pure or impure, if it's the same oven or not the same oven? Rabbi Eliezer is saying, I get to decide. This is my ruling. And the other rabbis, the majority in the room are saying it is not. And because we're the majority, we are not going to listen to this.
Deciding about the thing, we're deciding about our perception of the thing.
you'll see.
That's essentially a question, but it's both. We're deciding about, there's two layers to it. Are we deciding if the oven is pure or impure, or are we deciding who has the authority to decide? And so we'll keep looking at that.
Is the ritual purity the issue more than the oven being an oven, right? How do you purify an oven in the first place?
I'm not sure.
It doesn't matter for the discussion.
I wasn't sure if that was the.
Right, we're not gonna talk about the ritual purity is not the issue of the.
Okay.
It's only the issue of what they are voting on, or what they're arguing about, it's not the issue of what the whole
Story.
discussion is about.
Yeah, if we simplify it down to one rabbi saying it is a completely different oven, and the majority rabbis are saying it's the exact same oven, that's enough for us to move forward into the next part of our reading.
I'm reminded of a class I took 100 years ago. And it goes back to something called the argument of the beard. When is the beard a beard?
Right.
I have 2 days stubble. Is that a beard? Jason
When-
has a month's worth of beard. You have 2 months. When does the beard become a beard?
If you place one finger sand at a time on top of each other, when does it become a dune?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
right.
this is the question of identity. We could do that over and over again with every single item. When is it half full, or when does it become Gatorade versus water when I'm pouring in a Gatorade packet? These things are just hard to decide when the identity changes or when it remains the same. But we'll look, this conversation expands into a much bigger ordeal. Do you mind taking the next passage for us?
Sure. And this is known as the Oven of Akhnai. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of Akhnai, a snake, in this context? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, it is characterized in that matter due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when it rests.
Actually, we're gonna skip this one and go to the next one for the sake of time.
Okay. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. The rabbi said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from the carob tree. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backwards and began flowing in the opposite direction. They said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from a stream.
All right, so we have miracles at play that Rabbi Eliezer he's tried all of these different logical ways to prove the other rabbis wrong, and now he's resorting to divine intervention or miracles. He says, if I'm correct, have this carob tree move plainly. The carob tree gets up and walks 400 feet. And then they say, we don't decide halakha based on carob trees, that's ridiculous. And then he says, well, if the halakha is based on my opinion, the stream's gonna move backwards. The stream miraculously moves backwards. And the rabbis say classically, we don't decide our halakha based on streams, even though there is this evidence mounting that Rabbi Eliezer might be correct in the eyes of the divine. And so we have to ask the question here of the rabbis really don't care about the oven. What does the oven symbolize in this story?
Authority.
Authority of who gets to decide something. But what we can look at the oven as, and what I want us to look at as we continue reading the story, is the oven is the Jewish people. The oven is the Torah. This is being written after the destruction of the Second Temple, where the home of God has been destroyed, where the Jewish people have been exiled. They have been sliced horizontally, just like this oven, and have been spread out across the area, no longer in Israel. So the question is that they're asking, if the Jewish people, if the Torah can be sliced horizontally, can they be put back together and still be the Jewish people? Can they adapt and change, or can they not? Rabbi Eliezer is saying essentially, if you are cut horizontally, there's no way to be put back together, that the change is too great, that you are no longer the same Jewish people. But the rabbis are saying, after all of this destruction we've witnessed, we can, on good authority, put the pieces back together and continue the tradition of the Jewish people. Is everybody following? Yeah.
The tradition, that was what I was gonna say instead of what Jason said, but I mean, like Reform has moved some things, but it's still Judaism. So, I mean, tradition.
Some would
I
say
mean,
though,
this is a
some would
big-
not call it Judaism.
Right,
If you ask
exactly.
ultra-Orthodox people in Israel, they would say Reformi is not Judaism. So this is still a very present question in our current understanding of Judaism. Some people would say, reform has gone too far. They've strayed away from the halakha that was given in the Torah. That's what Rabbi Eliezer would say. But the other rabbis would say, absolutely not. The divine in Judaism exists in the people, in the majority ruling. And so we have these two very different opinions about what is to come of the Jewish people post the trauma of the destruction of the Second Temple. The oven becomes a much bigger idea. And right here, Rabbi Eliezer, who's saying the Jewish people can't be put back together, says, look, God is telling me right now the Jewish people can't be put back together. The carob tree moved when I asked it to. The river flowed backwards when I asked it to. God is saying that what you all are speaking to and advocating for is untrue. And the rabbis are saying, no, we have the majority, and we're not listening to that. So this is a bold stance. And I imagine everybody sitting up saying, why would God work against the idea of the divine and the Jewish tradition existing with the people? But we'll read in the story that God has an interesting take on this. And so I'd ask, do you mind reading the next passage for us? We're just going around. We're at Bava Metzia 59b3.
Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. The walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halakha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? The Gemara relates, the walls do not fall because of the deference due Rabbi Yehoshua, but they do not straighten because of the deference due Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning.
Okay, would someone mind explaining what we just read? I'm happy to if
You're right. No, you're right. We're both okay halfway.
well, that's what the miracles are showing, right? The walls are leaning. So again, Rabbi Eliezer says he's getting so frustrated that he says, if I'm correct, the walls of the room we are sitting in will collapse in on themselves. Do you see how this is escalating a great deal? At first, these are small miracles, but this last miracle here is saying the walls are going to crumble in and we will essentially die, if my opinion is correct.
You think of Samson tearing down the walls of the Philistine temple and killing everybody.
Yeah,
That's what-
exactly. And so Rabbi Yehoshua says, stop right there. He's speaking to the walls, interestingly enough, and he pauses the miracle or catastrophe, however you look at it, from happening. And so the walls are sitting perpetually leaning halfway. And so we have this interesting thing, and I want us to break down these miracles really quickly. A carob tree is a symbol of sustenance. It's a tree, and trees are just naturally this idea of a long life, which resembles tradition. And so when the carob tree is uprooted and displaced, maybe it reflects the destruction of the temple, that maybe this is Judaism being uprooted and displaced. Then we have the flowing of water reversed, which this is speaking to this idea of reversing history, potentially. And so what Rabbi Eliezer is still wishing is that the Second Temple wasn't destroyed and that history can be reversed. He's hoping for a time of the past. And the collapsing walls, this is the study house. This is the place of debate, of intellectual study. And right here, Rabbi Yehoshua is saying, yes, your miracles and your opinion might be correct, but the Beit Midrash, exactly what we're in right now, is a place of conversation with people, of argument and of debate. This is a sacred place that no matter if you believe your opinion is the correct one and the miracles are speaking to it, this is a sacred space and you cannot destroy the art of debate, conversation just by your one individual opinion. And our majority will defend the sanctity of the space that we communally hold together. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, you all on Zoom. This is where we are right now. And now we have the climax of the story. Do you mind continuing for us?
Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer? As a halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion.
Wow. God comes in and says, Rabbi Eliezer is right. And he's right on every single matter. Why are you arguing with him? He says the Jewish people cannot be put back together, that we're straying too far from the Torah. He's right. And what do the rabbis say? What do we think? What's the trend here?
We don't.
We don't care.
We don't care. They look at God and they say, we'll wait until the next thing, because there is a big surprise, but maybe they say we don't care. I'll build the tension a little bit, maybe they don't. But right now we have everything pointing to the idea that Rabbi Eliezer, this one individual opinion, is correct over the majority. And like we spoke earlier about the ship, it's usually the majority that decides the continuity of something, the identity of something. Usually the majority has authority over deciding that. And so this is going against our understanding, except for Rabbi Eliezer is saying God has authority. The other rabbis are saying, I don't know.
But even when we do halakhic disputes, today, often minority opinions are cited and supported, right? Like I'm just like, I've never understood halakha as sort of like, we always go with the majority of opinion. We look to tradition and sometimes adopt a minority opinion.
Actually, there is a halakhic debate, I think in the Talmud or Mishnah, where they say halakha is in accordance with the majority.
But you keep the minority's opinion as deference and humility, and minority opinions can be used very sparingly in specific situations, but generally the majority wins.
Is what we go with. But it's a good idea. It's a good thought, because we do work to high extremes of keeping the minority opinion. We keep so many, and it often creates confusion amongst the law. But that's exactly what they're debating here, is that we always need to keep the debate open between the people here on earth. The humans are the carrier of authority. And if we lose that, we lose a lot. We lose the minority opinion and the majority opinion. There is just one authoritative rule if we just listen to this divine voice. I mean, we don't have divine voices when it comes to our own halakhic understandings, but right here they're saying the majority decides, not the one correct opinion, but we keep all opinions in a conversation, and that actually that conversation is sacred and holy.
And is it possible that at some point that minority opinion will help reverse or change?
Very much so. I think that's a possibility, that
Right, that's what-
Judaism is so fluid, and this is actually what this text is speaking to. Judaism is so fluid that it can change, and that things in history like the Second Temple being destroyed speak to the idea that it has to change, that we have to pick up the pieces and put it back together. And maybe we put some metaphorical sand in there in order for the Jewish people to continue, because the divine exists in the sacred. But we have this last point, and then we'll go into a bigger discussion.
Question?
It opens the agency also.
It opens the agency
It's not
and
just God.
responsibility.
Right.
All right, let's read this last one,
Read this first.
and then we'll open it up to a discussion, because I think it'll clarify. Would you mind reading for us?
Rabbi Yeshua stood on his feet and said, "It is written, it is not in heaven." The Gemara asked, what is the relevance of the phrase, "it is not in heaven," in this context? Rabbi Yirmiah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halakha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. The Gemara relates, years after Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at the time when Rabbi Yeshua issued his declaration? Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me.
All right. The agency is there. So basically they say, Lo bashamayim hi, which is a verse from the Torah that says, this is not an issue of the heavens. In the Torah, it says, Lo bashamayim hi. This is not a situation of the heavens. This is something that is near and very close to you. And so right here, they respond to a divine voice. They respond to God, basically panim al panim, voice to voice, and say, this matter does not concern you, God. This matter concerns the people here. We get to decide. Humans have the agency to decide what is the future of halakha and the interpretation of the Torah. And what does God say as a response?
Yes.
He says,
good for you. Good
he
for you.
says, he smiles and says, my children have triumphed.
I want to, it's even more radical than that, because they quote a second verse and they misread that verse.
Okay.
Right, so the verse from Exodus that they quote after, in English it says after the majority, they're reading it, it says, you shall incline after the majority, but the full verse, they chop out the rest of the verse there. The full verse says, don't follow the majority towards idolatry. And they're reading it as follow the majority. They took away the word don't.
And
Right?
that's a classic.
And so it's so much so that they're saying God's words, we can chop up into, like the oven, we can chop up into different ways to interpret it. Even by taking a sentence and lopping off parts of it for making a halakhic decision.
Yeah, and so how do we feel about that? I mean, that is a huge theological stance about God's involvement in the world.
So according to you, the law was given at Sinai.
Yeah.
Moses came down, there's this golden calf.
Right.
And that's the majority. I mean,
Right, who's the majority?
the people standing at the bottom
Are-
of Sinai.
Are we talking about the people here, though? I'm asking
Oh, I
our
see.
teacher right here.
You're talking about rabbis.
Are we talking about the actual people, or who's the
This is-
majority we're talking about?
This
Well,
is a huge,
Aaron was there collecting the gold.
Yeah.
He's the rabbi, right?
and I think it would be, I forget what the word is called, but when you put new ideas on a past idea, something past in history, at this point, this isn't the ruling.
Yeah.
At Sinai, it is Bashamayim. This
Yeah.
is the rules
Right.
given from heaven. This majority rule is something that has been added
We're talking-
later on as ways that they felt was the best strategy
Right.
to keep the Jewish identity
But
intact.
we're still standing
after
at
the
Sinai at the
tragedy.
time of the.
Oh,
But it seems to me that there's two things, like it's certainly an argument in favor of rabbinic power, if you think about the rabbis trying to assert authority in the Second Temple period. It also strikes me as a little bit of anti-Christian polemic by discounting miracles.
Mm.
And the Christian thing, to me, it undergirds the idea that Judaism, at least from this, is a religion of debate and discussion and understanding or trying to
Speak up a
understand,
little bit, sorry.
trying to understand where Christianity is a little more faith-based. I was thinking just, what Rabbi Akiva says, on one foot, he says, basically, he states a golden rule. Hillel, I'm sorry, right? States a golden rule, and he says, the rest is commentary, go learn it, which means do this.
Mhm.
Jesus says the golden rule and have faith.
Mm.
So to me, that's very, and they were contemporaries.
I've
I think
actually
that's
never
very-
read this as a Christian polemic, but I think that's
I-
a
I think
great.
it's-
These things are
very
being
much.
written right in the wake of Christianity gaining a great amount of traction and power. It's become, it's.
Well, for me, they were, so, I know a lot of people feel that, Judaism preceded Christianity, but to me, rabbinic Judaism is more of a sister religion of Christianity.
I think so.
And these kind of things in, first century, second century, the rabbinic rabbis were at the same time that a lot of the Christian culture were going as
So
well.
let me ask you this question. Is our current day Judaism still connected to
The
Second
Temple
Temple Judaism?
Can I say? Connected, but so is Christianity.
But what you're saying is there's a break in it, that at rabbinic Judaism, we are an offshoot of something that grew up with Christianity, but is that too much of a break? To be still connected to the
Well,
Judaism
so
of
this
the
is, I mean,
second
this is,
and
this
first
is, this
temple?
is, this is the thesis argument, this is the argument here, when does something not become what it is? And this is what you said about how the Orthodox feel about us. Don't get real people practicing.
But I'll give you one possible answer to that, which is, Orthodox Judaism, which still ties everything to the sacrifices, has to remember the sacrifices and the morning prayers and everything probably is. I would argue that certainly, progressive Judaism with its emphasis on ethical monotheism has a different focal point than Second Temple Judaism.
Maybe, but it's more of a rhetorical point than an actual point, I would say, because we're still saying our three prayer services are still tied to the sacrifices, just like going back, right? We might have excised from our prayer book for time for making services shorter reasons and to not dwell on certain things maybe about sacrifices, but it's still, I would argue, and I would argue the leaders of the Reform movement in the mid-19th century saw themselves as a continuation and not as a break. And they specifically wrote, some of them saw themselves as a break and they were at the radical edges, but most of them saw themselves as this is what they saw themselves in the lineage of the majority and not of the lineage of
That may be true, but if you go and look at the evolution, right, and the question, I guess, is right, do you see it as a break or do you see it as an emphasis? But if you go look at Gates of Prayer, one of the Amidas brings in Amos and Micah and
for sure.
right?
But we're going back where they're using the library like the rabbis did in rhetorical ways, right? Not saying that this is part of the project, not something new, right? They're using God's words to emphasize specific things in the way that we want to emphasize them.
And I want to bring us just back to this, what we've been learning together the past few weeks. Think about how we've looked through the Sidurim, how we can look at our current modern day Sidur and connect the exact prayers back to nearly 2,000 years ago. That's a good argument that it's still a connected Judaism, that we're keeping essentially the exact same prayers, the same structure. And that's what we've been studying together the past few weeks.
So Jason used the term evolution, and I always think of it like evolution. People think, oh, we descended from the apes. No, we didn't. We and the apes descended from a common ancestor. So there's a connection all the way down, each step of the evolution. So you two use connected. Connected, I have no problem with. The same, obviously, it's not the same, but I think the evolution is what has led us to survive, and we've gotten such value out of that spiritually and community that it doesn't mean, I don't even care if it's the same as biblical Judaism. I care that it is connected to this evolution.
And
That brings up an interesting point back to Israel. You have the Jews that have made Aliyah who live in Israel, and we are in the diaspora. Are we the same? Are we related? How are we related? What have we lost? What have they lost?
Right.
I mean.
So, but we don't even have to, but we don't even have to go as far as Israel. Like, are we the same as Lubavitchers down the street? Are we the same as the Litvaks in Lakewood? Right? And
I would say no.
Right, and so, but you can argue yes, because
are we connected?
Are we part of the same process? But we're arguing, we're part of the, I mean, I would argue, I'm not such an essentialist saying that this is Judaism, but I would say there is a Jewish way of approaching our collective canon of texts, right? That I would say we're still within that boundary, they might say we're not, right? And so that includes, people in Israel too.
But I think for me, I agree with you, but it's really rabbinic Judaism that we have more of a connection to.
Yeah, but I don't like to make that distinction.
And the temple cult, with this, I mean.
Let's move this forward. Let me add an idea to the mix before we just go back and forth about the idea of connectedness versus same. If we even decide that we're not connected to the same source of Judaism, is it bad to be disconnected? Is a Judaism that is more resonant with each other more valuable, or is it Judaism that's still connected to the source more valuable? It feels like we have a valence under this idea of connected, that we have to be connected, but I don't think it's necessarily bad to disconnect and to make changes and not be stuck in that connection, not feel guilty for potentially breaking that connection.
Well, ultimately, to the extent that Judaism is a set of religious beliefs, and obviously it's a lot more than that, those religious beliefs have to be resonant with what we think of ethical morality in line with our own reasoning. I think, you know, in my view, I think the prophets did a nice job of that, and that therefore it's resonant, and so in that sense we're connected. But you know, we're also influenced by Spinoza, we're influenced by the Enlightenment in terms of our understanding of that, which is why, you know, I sort of share Ken's view about, you know, the return to the temple cult. I know the rabbi may have has expressed some different views on that in the past. So connectedness is great, but not at the expense of ethical belief.
Yes, or at the expense, at least this is my personal opinion, this is a bit editorial, at the religion not being resonant. Are we going to hold on to beliefs for the fact of a religion that people do not relate to? And I think that's a big question Judaism is facing right now, specifically Reform Judaism. Should we be making more extreme changes to be resonant in the modern day for American Jews or Jews across the world?
We should not follow the zeitgeist to follow the zeitgeist. We have to have an ethical, moral core.
But I'm saying even further, spiritually connected. Can we sacrifice being less connected in order to be more spiritually resonant to people following Reform Judaism?
We can do both.
Can we do both?
And
There's a tension there.
Yes.
I think there's a tension there, because I think a lot of people look at our services and say, there's too much Hebrew in the service. I don't even know what I'm saying half the time. Why am I doing that? And
Or
the
people
who
say
are
the reverse. There's
or-
not enough. There's not
Exactly.
enough Hebrew in our services, why I can't deal with this.
And people are advocating that Hebrew connects us to the Jewish identity as a whole. But can we sacrifice Hebrew being in the service for the sake of a service that's more resonant for people that don't find the Hebrew resonant?
Say the English after Hebrew, you don't have everything.
I think that's a good point. And there is a balance here, but it's a question that's at the forefront of Reform Judaism of how much can we stretch away from the connected whole Jewish identity with still being connected, but being resonant in a modern world.
And who has the authority in a non-hierarchical society? In a non-hierarchical, especially American Reform Judaism is non-hierarchical, right? I love when people don't understand Reform Judaism, they call like Rick Jacobs the chief rabbi of Reform Judaism. He's not the chief rabbi. He's like, you know, he's a very respected and smart guy, but he's a bureaucrat who runs an organization.
Yeah.
Right? Who has the authority to decide these things?
So to me, you know, in America, there's a little bit of natural selection going on here. So to the extent, I don't know the answer, but I tend to think it shakes out in the wash. Because those synagogues, those organizations that are able to meet the people's need in a place like ours, in a country like ours, where participation is optional, will survive. And those that do not, will not. I mean, I know I've spoken to you a little bit about, I know you mentioned about the conservative movements having a rough go. And it's because they haven't adapted. Maybe. I don't know.
But you know, to the rabbi's point about authority, right? I think you have to have some locus of authority to keep everybody to keep sort of everybody connected and to keep it sort of coherent, right? You know, however much I might disagree with the rabbi on any particular, you've heard a couple here today. Like you are our spiritual and intellectual leader, and I'm going to defer to you on both matters.
Thank you. James, you're a very good person. But in America, you can go form your own synagogue if you want.
Absolutely. I can go down the street. No.
Yeah, you can bring people together. No, but who has, and I have like American post-Enlightenment rabbis have in the West. We have no authority to hold people together. I cannot fine you. I cannot flog you. I cannot what the rabbi could have done 200
Yeah,
years ago.
but you have the intellectual leadership and knowledge to
Thank you.
bring that, to bring
But
us.
but it's all
together.
voluntary. It's all,
And-
you all have
We
to,
bestow it on him.
you bestow it on me and you have to agree,
And
you
we
have to,
agree.
you have to, like, no, exactly, because I also have authority because you all have chosen to pay me for it, right? It's a contract, but you can choose not to, right?
All right, we're gonna move forward a little bit. Because
Please had something to
Yeah.
say.
It's the hardest job in the world
Excuse
because
me,
everyone
Dan.
your bullets
Oh,
points
oh,
away.
oh, good. The purpose of the rabbis in this story and at that time was to create a culture that could survive without a temple loci, that could survive.
very much so.
Here we are, 2,000 years later. Where are the Edomites or
Right.
the Hittites or, so their purpose was to give us a structure that would adapt to other environments other than the temple environment.
Which is why this story is so important.
And along those lines, Reform Judaism, it wasn't so long ago that Reform rabbis would refuse to perform a wedding between interfaith couples.
Yeah.
And it used to be, you know, the standard line, what do you call a rabbi who performs interfaith marriages? You'd say wealthy.
That's right, if they're working it.
Now, that's not so necessarily the case.
Very much, and this text specifically speaks to evolution is a necessary part of Judaism.
And
That it
watching,
sits within the people, that God and the ruling of Judaism in our tradition sits with the people. But I want to offer the idea, is that necessarily good?
Right.
That God is so withdrawn, is that a sad thing? That God is no longer involved in the Jewish tradition. Not that God isn't present, but in the decision making. I think there's a real fear there that because the responsibility is on us, can we trust the human people to hold Jewish tradition in a net positive way for the sake of tradition and community? I just want to highlight that there is some sadness as well to this idea of change and fluidity.
Like when we lose our childishness, our wonder, like how the child is wondering about everything. And
Yeah, and I think it's a natural thing that with change, we have net good a lot of the time, but with change as well, there's harsh things. There's parts of us that we have to mourn when our identity changes.
When the kids move out of the house, they can't come back over, come back into and have the parents do the laundry. That's God. We'll say my children have defeat, you know, they're now on their own, right?
All right, we're gonna move to the next text right now, because we have 9 minutes left, and I want us to highlight that idea of the
I
pain.
think God is always there. I don't think you.
No, I think it's not saying God is not always there, but God is not involved in the decision-making of Jewish people. That God will never intervene again is what it's saying. That we will not have a miracle come in and say, you're doing something wrong or you're doing something correctly. And I think there's something scary about that.
Yeah, but did those miracles really ever happen, or were people using their agency and majority rule or something
Yeah,
way back when?
or just an individual was asserting their opinion in such a way that was overstepping the majority. I want us to move forward to Bava Metzia 59b7.
Leslie's been trying to ask a question for the
Oh,
last half hour.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your
That's
hand.
right.
No, I mean, because earlier you were talking about authority. Versus, I lost the thought, authority versus, truth. Versus
Mhm.
authority and truth. So if God is kind of handing it over to us to have the authority. Is it that there's a truth that it's up to us to figure out what's right, or is there like no truth?
I think what we're seeing here is God is saying there is no longer an objective truth in the world, that all of our values have some subjectivity. No one can come in and say, this is the absolute rule and you have to follow it. There is no longer that element of absolute truth here, is at least how I would read into it. That if God is the sayer of truth and he recedes to the majority human opinion, where the human experience is dependent on subjectivity, that truth is essentially lost at this as well. The absolute truth. There is still subjective truth and majority truth, but the idea of an objective truth, I believe, is totally lost. And that's something that is scary to lose for the Jewish people. And I think that's exactly the harshness of this ruling as well.
There's a difference between there not being a truth and God not holding us to truth, and we can just decide whatever it is we decide, doesn't mean whether or not there is a truth.
That's a good point, that no one will come down and say this is the objective truth. And so truth is then decided without this external hand slapping down on someone's wrist when truth is broken.
And the rabbis still have to root themselves in the Torah. They can't, their authority comes from their interpretation of Torah. It's not from just whatever they are feeling like. They still have to root it in God's.
And majority, there are
Right.
still barriers that the majority has to keep up the correct opinion, the correct halakha. There's no way one person can come and say, I'm absolutely changing Judaism. That's not how it works. And that's specifically saying we are against the idea of one person coming in. The majority holds it, the people hold it. And with one person coming in saying this is the absolute truth, that's not how we work. We work in discussions, disagreements, and conversations around a table in a Beit Midrash exactly like this. But I want to talk about that morning. We go to Bava Metzia 59b, and they decide they need to exile Rabbi Eliezer because all of his rulings have become invalid. We go to the next page, and do you mind reading this Bava Metzia 59b-7? Rabbi Akiva is charged to go tell Rabbi Eliezer that he is ostracized from the community.
What did Rabbi Akiva do? He wore black and wrapped himself in black as an expression of mourning and pain, and sat before Rabbi Eliezer at a distance of 4 cubits, which is the distance that one must maintain from an ostracized individual. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, what is different about today from other days, that you comport yourself in this manner? Rabbi Akiva said to him, my teacher, it appears to me that your colleagues are distancing themselves from you. He employed euphemism as actually they distanced Rabbi Eliezer from them. Rabbi Eliezer too rent his garments and removed his shoes, as is the custom of an ostracized person, and he dropped from his seat and sat upon the ground.
Okay, let's read one more as well, and then we'll stop there. You mind reading the next one? Sorry.
The Jura Maharaj relates his eyes shed tears, and as a result, the entire world was afflicted. 1/3 of its olives were afflicted, and 1/3 of its wheat, and 1/3 of its barley. And some say, even though dough kneaded in a woman's hand spoiled, the sages taught there was a great anger on that day. Any place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his glaze on was burned.
Okay, and I want to highlight one line in the page before. Rabbi Akiva decides to do it because he says, I will go unless an unseemly person goes and inform him in a callous and offensive manner. And he would therefore destroy the entire world. So what is the perspective of Rabbi Akiva here in the lesson being taught?
Kind, even if you have to disagree with the person.
That there's a level of respect when it comes to disagreement, but he puts on all black. The Rabbi Eliezer sits down on the ground on a low place and rents his garments. When do we think about ripping our clothes in Judaism? It's mourning.
They were sort of reminding me of Job almost.
Yeah, exactly. This is a mourning practice. Rabbi Akiva is going and sitting with a friend that he studied with and mourning the loss of him in the community. And what does this speak about in the greater picture? If change depends on humans, some people are going to be disagreed with. Some people are going to be outside of the majority opinion. And what our Talmud is aware of right now is that being on the outside and the decision going against you has real pain and harshness to it. And we should mourn the loss that happens with change. We should sit with people that are victims of the change that happens, because when there's disagreements with people, not everybody comes out on top. And so I think this is a lesson not only in being kind to people we disagree with, but also to hold their pain and harshness after the fact, because it's a tough emotional place to be when your tradition is moving on without you.
I don't understand his crime. Why is he ostracized? Because he had an opinion?
It's hard. The Talmud is using language from long ago, but essentially he was an individual that was he was ignoring the majority opinion over and over again. The
And
majority
using,
said-
using illegitimate means to say that he's right.
Oh,
It's
so
illegit-
making
the
it-
miracles and bringing God into the discussion. He's trying to break the system so that he is right.
Right,
But
he's
what
trying to dismantle the disagreement in the majority rule system. He's saying, I'm an individual, I know I'm correct, and he's standing on that, but that's not how the Jewish people work.
But we should still respect those who are different and listen, because you never know, things may change.
But,
And-
right, but he didn't respect the majority because he's bringing
Well,
illegitimate means into the discussion.
But
Right,
you're
that's-
exactly right,
yeah.
that we should still think about those that we disagree with in a
Not just
kind
more
way.
with
Yeah.
them, but
Yeah, so in this conversation as a whole, we have this idea that we humans, we have agency to change. That
What
we,
about the last sentence? where it
Where's
says,
the last
Any
sentence?
place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his gaze was burned. I mean, like he's shunned forever?
No,
He
yeah,
was wrecking.
it's all right.
he's so angry that like his vision, everything he touches is met with such anger. I think this is used in metaphorical language,
Right,
but we do have a story in the
Like the predator.
Talmud by Yochanan ben Zakkai, where he is so angry that laser beams shoot out of his eyes and burn everything he sees, which maybe that's metaphorical as well, but they harp a couple times that he has laser beam power.
Which is why
Politician was right about me.
well, in Hebrew, when you are angry, your nose burns.
But that's why Jews wrote Marvel comics, laser beams.
All right, so I
But
just,
it's also saying, I think it's also saying that Eliezer had, someone like Eliezer, even though you have to be kind to him and respect him, has destructive abilities. If he was allowed to stay in the Beit Midrash and he could use his destructive abilities to destroy it, right? He wanted the walls to fall on everybody, right?
he did risk death for everybody in the room. That's
Yes,
kind of
right.
means for ostracization.
But at the same time, kicking someone out brings plague upon the crowds.
Yes.
Right.
So this story as a whole teaches that Judaism is continuous, even when we have great historical rupture, that authority lives with the people, with the majority, in discussions, in conversations, in rooms just like this. And that reassembly is not just possible, but it's sacred work. And I think this idea can even be extended to our modern day politics and things like that. That us people, we have the power to make decisions, that we are charged with the agency of change. There is no hope of the divine coming and intervening, however scary that is. But I think this story motivates us that the power for change exists around this table, exists in each and every one of us, and that our interpretive lens of how we see the world, how we see Judaism rests in us and our interpretive. We all have an interpretive license to do so. We can all read our texts with our own personal understanding and bring it into community and discussion.
Just given this whole argument, is there any necessity to go back to the beginning and say God was ever involved?
Whoa.
That's a tough question. I'll let you all be the decider on that since we're at 10 o'clock. But I appreciate everybody participating in this. And a warm Shabbat Shalom. That we have the courage to build and change and continue the Jewish people together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.